Thanks for inviting me to come and speak. And old friend John Strang is here. We've known each other for, God, it's been a long time, right? It's funny how older you get, long is not near as long. Of course, you can't remember how long it is either. So anyway, let's talk about blackberries. I guess one of the key things I want to mention to you that have on your mind, is our Arkansas breeding program. It's close to I-40, and I know that's a little bit further south of here, but our material is probably pretty well adapted in Kentucky. One of the key things about plant breeding, it's good if you can find a plant developed in an environment like yours. So that's a real plus without you having to spend all the money for 50 years breeding. So why blackberries? Well, you might say, why put a slide like that up there? Well, in the big picture, in the world, in the country, and here in Kentucky, hopefully it's true, blackberries continue to get more popular. Blackberry, what's interesting about blackberries compared to, let's say, blueberry? Blueberries have a very expansive promotion mechanism behind them. They have what's called a research and promotion program where a little bit of money is contributed, you probably wonder about that word, by grower sales, if you're above a small farmer, and that goes into, makes millions of dollars for promotion and research. Well, that's one of the reasons you see so much about blueberries. There's a lot of promotion where you see a blueberry all the time. That's the miracle berry. A few years ago, we didn't even know what blueberries were. Somebody at least is older. Blackberries don't have that. Blackberries just kind of go on their own appeal. But folks like blackberries, and I think the main reason they like blackberries is because they're better than they used to be. I started out picking blackberries on a fence row in Pond Dam, edge of the forest. When I was growing up in Mississippi. They're nothing like that anymore. One of the key things about blackberries, and I realize this is not what you're doing here, but just in the big blackberry world, shipping blackberries have become a major enterprise. People refer to blackberry as the fourth berry after straw, blue, rasp, and blackberries next. And blackberries actually on a percentage basis continues to have a more upward growth compared to the other berries. And one key thing about that, and again, I'm not going to talk about that a lot today because I don't think that's what you're going for, but they're subject to a wholesale price. So if you happen to be in conversations, let's say that you're going to the Southeast Fruit and Vegetable Conference in Savannah, Georgia later this week, and you get to talking to some blackberry grows in Southern Georgia, they're going to say bad things because the price was not good last year. It was break even or less because of so many berries on the market. However, the local markets, which I think most of you are focused on, is a great thing in getting better. So on farm, pick your own. Farmers market is community supported agriculture, which it's now got a simpler name called farm share. If you don't know what that is, that's an interesting way to sell, where people come and they pay you every once a month and you deliver produce in some form to them. And the key thing, all this is a retail price as opposed to a wholesale price. So two big things about that. One is a retail price, doesn't take long to figure out that's more money. And secondly, you're not subject to some national production. You're not worried about South Georgia or California or Mexico. It's people that you're going to sell to are not tuned into that. So when we get to cutting to the meat of the matter, I don't work in extension, but I answer a lot of questions, and I answer all questions unless I lose them. And folks often ask me, what variety should I plant? And the first thing I always talk about before we start talking about what to plant, I want to know, what are you going to do with these berries? You got friends and you got kin folks, we don't know if they're going to pay for them, and you're going to have more berries than they're going to eat pretty quick. So what are you going to do with them? That's very key. The benefit to that big shipping market is you're dealing with basically one phone call, one or a series of big old trucks, as opposed to 4,000 people that someone's going to talk to and hand to. And those 4,000 people, it's great to have 4,000 friends, but some of them will take up a lot of your time. And you have to have a source of temperance, and some of them might be crazy, but that's what life's all about. So think about first what you're going to do with them. Market always is something to think about. And one key thing on the local market thing, and I've seen this occur, works itself out, is if somebody has a planting near a small city and then somebody puts in several more put in, you can have competition that can lower the price. But that's where innovative marketing can take place. Folks call and say, which one of the blackberries from Arkansas should I plant? There's a list there that I want to talk about a little bit more. Those are the key ones. There may be some names that you know of our Native American series from Arkansas that aren't on there. It's probably because they are older. We don't feel like they're really the best ones to plant. I'm more than happy to talk about others, but those are the key things. And one thing I want to mention, Dr. Joe Moore there on the right, Dr. Moore started the Arkansas fruit breeding program in 1964. I came to Arkansas in 1980. So let's see, this is my 42nd year of working there. And so this has been a long program with many varieties released, much more than this. But we all build on what someone else did many years ago, and that's staying with it. To have a program that's been over 50 years that's a long time to keep focused. Different reasons for that. Somebody has to want to fool with it, and you have to figure out how to pay for it. So often folks will call and they say, I've heard of so-and-so variety, should I consider that one? And of course, I like to know, like, okay, you heard of a variety. Where'd you hear about that? Because I want to see, maybe I'm talking, I get emails and calls of somebody who's got one plant in their backyard, or they may want to be planting 40 acres. It'll take a little while for me to get to the bottom of this. Now, the one plant in their backyard, I'm going to talk to them because it just, that's what mama teaches you down south. But I really don't want to waste too much time with them because that 15-minute, 20-minute conversation, end up costing a good bit as far as from a labor standpoint. But tell me what you've heard about a variety, I'll ask people. Where did you hear it? Because I can tell oftentimes if someone, had just been on the internet and they've heard about something, that's a lot different than someone who grew it down the road. I like to know, what do you know? And I like to talk to people that consider things and, what do you know about growing blackberries? What's your expertise? What kind of weather you've got? Because that's always an issue. Unfortunately, I have some folks email me and I'll answer questions. They'll email again 18 months later. We're old friends and I can't remember where they are. And so because that's such a big deal, where are they? Are they in Florida or are they in Minnesota? That's a world of difference in the answer. But the bottom line on this, learn all you can from other growers. Great asset there to take part in. Nursery folks, extension agents, you're not going to know too much, I can tell you that. So let's talk about some specific varieties. This may be a variety you've not heard of, I don't know. Hopefully you can pronounce it. It's Ponca. Now, our Arkansas Flora King fruiting varieties are named after Native Americans. And some people would say, well, why would you do that or whatever? Well, the original idea that Dr. Moore had back in the first varieties came out in 1974, Cherokee and Comanche were the first two, is he wanted to honor Native Americans. That's why I chose that theme. It's also easy oftentimes to kind of know a varieties from somewhere if you have a theme. But also blackberries largely are a Native American fruit. Peaches are from China. Apples are from, the Middle East, Georgia, Kazakhstan area. So a little different. So back to Ponca. Well, last thing I say there, the one I make sure I pick first to tote home. Now, my summertime during June and into July, during blackberry season, our research station that I go to is 90 miles from my house. I live in Fayetteville, and this is in Clarksville, Arkansas. I go there on Sunday afternoon, and I come home on Friday, and I work as long as I can stand it. On Friday afternoon, I usually go pick. And so this will be the one that I will go pick to carry home. And you might say, well, how do you eat blackberries after you food with them all week? Well, I don't eat many on the weekend that time of year, but I like to let other folks taste things so I can learn more about what they like. So this is one that is, it's just a great berry. It's the best I've seen. I'm kind of particular about who I want to let go and pick in the plots because I like to pick them myself. What's so great about it? Well, the first thing is the sweetest one we've got. Folks like sweet fruit. Now, some of you out there want a little more tartness than others, okay? But sweet is always a winner. And if you went out and canvassed all the people that ever eaten a blackberry, and they said, what's the main thing you don't like? It would be tart flavor, okay? And so we want these to be something that you eat, not go make pies and ice cream, jelly and all that stuff. Nothing wrong with all that, but eating it fresh is really the healthiest, and that's what Ponca offers. It has a reduced acidity. It's at below 1%. So that's a calculation we have, but we do measure it rather than just tasting it, saying, well, that's not very acidic. So it's a little more objective to measure. We can reduce the acidity in breeding. One of the things that's interesting about Dr. Moore, my predecessor, he and I just had different profiles we liked. I like sweeter stuff with lower acidity. He's just a little different in that. So I've been fooling with this a lot of years. So I've selected plants with reduced acidity. Can't get too low in acid because then you lose the flavor. But it has nice aromatics. When we talk about blackberries, we've got sweet, tart, some would call that sour. Aromatics, that's the flavor component that you taste. And then if the berry is bitter, you will notice that toward the end of your eating experience. So we want to select or get away from bitterness. I know that bitterness is a big deal in beer, but that's a whole different experience. But folks are really liking this one. This is the first berries were on the market this last summer, back in 21, at our local Fayetteville Farmers Market. A grower had some, and people just buy blackberries. They don't know one blackberry from another, but they asked what this was. And he put a sign out there that said, this is Ponca. And had folks lining up for it. They didn't want the other varieties anymore. That was an interesting experience. It's an early variety. It ripens pretty much with natchez. When they release a variety, oftentimes when it gets out there with everyone, these dates of ripening vary a little bit from what I say, because the seasons vary and location effects vary. It's pretty much with natchez, one of our earliest varieties, 2 to 4 days before Caddo and Osage, and about a week before Washita, which is a big variety from Arkansas. It has about a 7-gram berry. It's larger than Osage, about with Washita, but it is smaller than Caddo and natchez. So some people would say, well, big berries sell. But it's interesting. We've got a grower that is natchez, and then he put Ponca beside it. And even though natchez is really big and it's a good berry, folks left the big ones alone when they found out about Ponca. That was an interesting comparison. So you just live and learn, but it's a new variety. So we'll see how it goes. As far as yield goes, it's comparable to Osage and Washita. It's not as high yielding as natchez. Natchez is a real workhorse for yield. It'll overfruit. And we say 20 to 22,000 pounds per acre. That's a value we use in our calculations as far as what it yields. Some people will make more than that. Some people will make less. We want the yield potential for a variety when it's released to be equal to what we've been growing, and that's the key. There's a few things about the plants a little different. The bud break dates with Caddo and Osage later than natchez. Natchez can get nipped a little in the spring after bud break. And the bloom dates with, sorry about this thing, really sensitive. With Caddo a little later than Osage and Washita, but 8 days later than natchez and bloom. We usually don't think about bloom on blackberries being a big problem like peaches, because peaches bloom much earlier. But you can get nipped some on blackberry bloom. This year we had a frost on April 21st. It's never frosted that late in Arkansas. That's past the frost-free date. You can't ever tell about the weather. It seems like these days you really can't tell about the weather. One thing that's interesting about this plant, look at that upper right picture. It's got these extended clusters or inflorescences that will extend on past the primary crop. So it kind of has some secondary buds that help stretch out the fruiting period. And I suspect that gives you a little bit of a secondary crop to hedge against spring damage, frost damage. And it will send a few basal canes, which come out toward the base of the crown also. That's something that's really important for local markets, because you get some fruit that's a little later that comes in after the big part. And if you're selling those things for, $5, $6, $7, $8 a quart, you'll go out there and pick. If you've got 40 acres of these for shipping, you may not do that because of labor problems with that. But anyway, let's move on to plant health. Now, healthy plants make sweet berries as long as the genes are there to make that happen. So one of the things I really focus on, because our environment, just like yours, it's not like having somebody from California in paradise coming over here and telling you, well, we don't have to do anything but the plants, we just set them there, because California is a paradise in general. We got rains and all sorts of problems just like you. So these plants, set that thing down, have floricane and primocane leaves have a deep green color. Green, healthy leaves, instead of getting spots on them or turning yellow or falling off. And I haven't seen any of the common diseases on the plants. I say I haven't seen any. I don't go so far as to say you would never see any diseases. Now, something I want you to look at a little bit. Now, it's pretty bright in here, but I want you to look first off on the lower left. Now, that's what erect blackberries look like. And this would be about the 15th of June. So look at that plant is being harvested. You can't really see the fruit on it. Now, the floricanes are fruiting there lower, and look at the cane sticking up above. That's the primocane. So the grower will have to come in here on that and cut those things back. You need to tip them about shoulder high. And they're sticking all up there in the way. You come in there and cut that, not to mention the labor to cut it. All that stuff falls down on the canopy. So let's look now. I didn't do anything there. I don't even have that thing in my hand. Is it on auto timing? Is that meant to move me along? Look it over to the right. Now this is on in the middle of Ponca season. Most of the fruit has been harvested and the canes are still below the top of the canopy. And this is on in toward the latter part of June. So this is a different type of cane and plant. So what's different about it? Well, the internodes, the distance between the leaves and the buds, are a little shorter. It has a different architecture is what we call it. But if you get over to in the middle of winter, the canes look just like all the rest of them. They're not short plants per se. And I didn't do anything there to make that change. So look here at these, look at the buds on that. See, they're closer together than normal. So the shorter internode is an architectural difference with Ponca. Okay, many of you know that the first year when you plant plants, even the Arkansas erect varieties, you got to tie them up. The canes are not erect. So this is what Ponca and other Arkansas varieties will look like after 1 year. So these plants were planted in May, and this is taken in about September. Now they've been tied up. There's a wire there to make sure that you get that fruit up there, because you can get a lot of fruit. You can get full yields that first 14 months after planting if you do everything right. The Poncas are a really strong growing plant. And it looks like it's going to be easier to manage. The canes are a little thicker that first year too. Really nice looking plants. And then the subsequent years, the canes will be more erect. You won't have to be doing all this time.
Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Go back to that photo, that last one. You're using landscape fabric for mulch.
Yeah, that's a landscape fabric that's there. Some people use black plastic. That happens to be landscape fabric. It holds up longer. We shifted to that from black plastic.
You have a problem. Primicanes getting stuck underneath.
No, that's a good question. I'll get back up here so people can hear. The question about they have trouble with the primicanes coming up. Well, if some of you grew the older thorny varieties like Shawnee or Cheyenne or something like that, those tended to have more canes that came up all in the planting row. These varieties these days, the thornless ones, are more crown forming. And I once thought, first time I saw black plastic laid down, I thought to the grower, I said, that's going to be a mess. Where those canes going to get through there? But it's really more of a crown forming type plant now as opposed to sprouting everywhere. And I don't see that as any big problem either. If you get down and genetically, the genes for thornless came from things like smooth stem, thorn-free, Chester, or some of those things. And those were all crown forming. The thorny types were sprouting from the roots. Now, sometimes they sprout a lot of places you don't want to. That answer your question? Yes.
I think the rain gets through.
Yeah, it seems to get through there all right. Of course, these are irrigated too. Now, black plastic, rain not going to get through there except the hole.
Where's your irrigation?
Well, that irrigation is actually on top, so it can be seen and see if it's working. Some people put it underneath too. I kind of like to see what's going on, but I'm not the one that manages the planting. Okay, so let's talk about ponca a little bit more. Winter hardiness is something that you need to have on your mind here in Kentucky. And so it looks like it's hardy, similar to Washita and Osage. We had -15 last February, 15 months ago, and it's never been that cold at our research location. I noticed it didn't get that cold over here, John Trang said a while ago, or maybe it was Daniel said that. So it's seems like it's plenty hardy. You know, we'll see, but a lot of that has to do with what the weather's been like. You have plants, you have these warm periods and it gets bad cold. That can hurt plants just because they lose hardiness. Chilling's not a concern for you because you get plenty of chilling. As far as post-harvest, now realize in the shipping market, this is really important to have berries that hold up over time. Now, this is good also for local markets because if you don't get them all sold, they'll hold up. So this has, ponca has very good post-harvest storage performance. Those plants on the upper fruit there have been stored for a week. They look pretty good and they tasted good. They have firm berries, can have a little more leakage than some. Leakage is not near the killer that this reversion or this reddening of the drupes, the red little brown things. And so the key thing, though, that after a week, it always tasted good. You know, a blackberry can have a little reduction in acidity if some of that breaks down over time, but they're not going to get sweeter. So if you say, well, they're sweeter this week than a week before, that's because a little acidity went down. But you don't make more sugar with a berry. It is what it is. So this is one that will handle well even for local markets where you won't hopefully be in trouble if you don't sell them all the same day. So that's ponca. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Shipping,
Yes.
shaking, shipping.
Well, when I say shipping, I'm talking about people that grow truckloads of it, that sort of thing. Now, as far as shaking, well,
You know what shipping is going to.
yeah, well, yeah, that's another issue potentially. Some people would say some of the reddening of the drupes is due to shipping or jiggling. And I mean, I've been to central Mexico, but that's where 75% of our commercial blackberries come from. And the road from central Mexico to here is different from the road from here to New Orleans or McAllen, Texas. A little different environment there as far as the highways go. Another fairly new variety just released the year before ponca is called Caddo. Now, a lot of you want to say Cato, and that's all right. Whatever it is, you just look at that, but it's Caddo is how it's supposed to be pronounced. This is another thornless, erect, floricane fruiting variety. It's a half sibling. One of the parents is common with Osage. So all that's geared toward increased flavor, which Caddo has, as does Osage. I'll speak about a little bit more soon. Okay, now it's holding me back. So a little bit about Caddo. You can see Caddo a little bigger than ponca. It's also pretty early. Now, average of 8th of June for us, a little bit before Washita Key. Now, there's something that's been interesting that growers have found with this that you might know. They planted Caddo in the first year. It does not ripen early. And then the second year, it ripens more like I say it does here. That's been an interesting phenomenon. Talked to a grower the other day outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and he was talking about his first year plants. He liked them because they were late. I called him the other day and I said, about the next year, were they late again? He said, no, you were right, they're not late. So that's something I hadn't seen a variety do, run a little bit later the first year. So generally, we tend to think of this a little bit before Washita, but it will fruit a long time also. It's bigger, it's 8 or 9 grams. So it's bigger than Osage and bigger than Washita, and it stays large all season. Some of you have grown variety Navajo, the first thornless from the Arkansas program released in 1989. And there's one thing about Navajo, because it was a real breakthrough when it came out, you know, the later berries were almost always smaller. So I was very surprised, and Natchez was the first variety I saw do this, that the berries stay big all season. That was tricky. I didn't know that that could be done genetically, and it can be. This is one of them that does that. Okay, next slide. It tends to yield like the others, as I mentioned before, is our standards. The bud break is with Osage, a little later than Natchez also to get away from some of that early damage. Bloom is more with Osage and Washita, quite a bit later than Natchez, again, trying to hedge away from and avoid that early bloom damage. And it will produce a few basal canes that come out from the crown also. Okay, next slide. Oh. There we go. Again, great plant health, looking for those healthy leaves. I want the floricane leaves to stay green well after all the berries are gone. You might say, what difference does it make if the berries are gone? Oh, I believe this. I believe those floricane leaves are sending carbohydrates back into that crown and into those primocanes for next year's crop. It only just common sense says that's the case. And that is true. Many, many years ago, I had a student that did some work with nitrogen fertilization, and he'd use this N15, which is a labeled nitrogen. You can track where it goes in the plant. And it was interesting. A bunch of the nitrogen in the spent floricanes was reduced later in the year. It went somewhere. It went back into that crown and back into the primocanes, and the carbohydrates do the same thing. So I think that keeping healthy leaves are really important here. So we all want to be healthy, and we perform better when we are. And I haven't seen problems with diseases here on Caddo either. It seems to be a nice clean plant. Okay, as far as winter hardiness, it looks to be similar to Washita and Osage. Again, it went through the -15 just fine. The plants were well hardened in that week. I went back and looked to see how cold was it before it got -15. And boy, it was cold all day and into the teens at night. That can affect how things work. And we don't really know about the chilling, but that's no concern to you. The flavor is a key attribute. This one has a little different aromatic component to it. It really tastes good. Tends to be 10% sabosolids or more, not quite as high as Ponca. It has about 1% acidity. So what I've learned over time is these blackberries are about like us. They vary a little bit in what they do. Some of you out there will prefer this berry over Ponca because you want a little more acidity. That's just how we are. But our society, you know, in the United States and the world is really changing a lot. People have lots of different flavors or preferences they have for tastes in the world. And as we internationalize both our population here but around the world, folks just like different things. So this one has a little more acidity, but that aromatic component always stays there really handy. It stores well. Those berries there have been sitting there about a week. Look good as they did to start with. Has very good firmness, and the flavor really stayed there. So watching that aromatic component, does it hold up in the refrigerator? That's what you're really looking for. And it's stored adequately for 14 days and 6 of 7 years. So that's getting pretty long for storage. That's longer than you'll want to. If you don't have it sold in 14 days, you're probably thinking about doing something else with your blackberries anyway. And why would you say 6 of 7 years? Rain has a huge impact on the storability of blackberries. And it rains where we are and it rains where you are. If you don't have rains, it's amazing how these blackberries will hold up, like a miracle. So that's 2 new varieties I want you to know about, Ponca and Caddo. So I want to touch a little bit on some of the older varieties now. Washita, I call it the Arkansas Standard. This is the most widely planted of any Arkansas variety. It's released in 2003, so it's nearing the end of its patent life. I have often said, if you plant one Arkansas variety, plant this one. But I looked at that statement the other day when I was preparing this talk, and I said, but that may be changing because we've got newer ones to come along here that have some positives. And that should be how it is if you continue to breed a plant. It should get better. Has a 6 to 7 to 8 gram berry. It's just a good shipper. This is really the backbone variety for the Southeast shipping industry. It has a reduced acidity, although like other blackberries, sometimes they're tart and sometimes they're not, depending on the season and how ripe they are. It's a mid-chill variety, but it's well adapted here. It works well on this rotatable cross-arm trellis. I'm not going to talk about trellising today. Some of you may have heard of that, but this one seems to do well with it. And just not a lot of complaints about Washita. It's still a highly recommended variety. Natchez, big and early. Natchez, about a week before Washita, it has high yield potential. Don't let it overcrop. Look at those great big berries right there. They're really impressive. Tends to do much better in North Carolina and Arkansas, and I suspect in Kentucky also versus southern Georgia. Look at that picture down below. What's going on there? Well, those plants down there in southern Georgia basically just killed themselves fruiting. Are we about up at time? Okay. And so that's because they just have too much yield potential. Too much yield potential, more than they can handle. It can be tart early, but it also can be about the best berry I've had. It's just that early in the season, often people notice it's tart. Fills the clamshell quick because they're big. It's a little trickier on post-harvest handling because of, well, it's just not as firm. So growers in the deep south would try to pick it before 10 in the morning before it got too hot. It's working well on the shift trellis, one of my favorites. So Osage, I'm going to talk on just a couple of points here. I know our time is getting short. This is a really good flavored berry. It was released in 2013. It's been out a few years. It's a complement to Washita, not quite as big, but boy, it has a great flavor. It's one of my favorites. I'd go pick Ponca first, and then I'd go to Osage next as far as what I would take home. Handles good. Some growers have found reduced nitrogen has benefited to post-harvest handling. Folks say, bring this one home. At least they said that before Ponca. It picks easy into a clamshell, particularly if you're putting them in smaller clamshells because the berries are round and they're not so big where you can't get the lid closed. This is worth trying. If you haven't heard it and hadn't tried it, boy, it's a good one to have on the earlier side. So there's the varieties right there, a little bit about how they go. Now, this is the floricane information that I have for you. So let's hop on over here and talk about primocane fruiting. I'm just going to have to skip the part about what primocane fruiting is. Basically, it's something where you could get two crops from the plants. You can get a floricane crop, but then if things go well, you can get a primocane crop. Now, that's in California in October. Now, we used to not have any blackberries in October in the moderate climate of the coastal California. What about the varieties? Well, Primark 45 has been the most important one. There's been a lot of Primark 45 grown, particularly in California. We've had pretty good success with primocane fruitings in North Carolina. Dr. Pomper back there and Terry Crabtree have worked with the primocane fruiters. They know about in Kentucky how they do. Generally, for us, the primocane crop is less than the floricane crop. It's the other way around if you go to more moderate climates. So what about this climate thing? Well, usually when it gets 90 and above in the summer, that can hinder primocane fruiting, and it's going to get 90 and above here. I know that. That berry there looks like Mickey Mouse. That's multiple berries forming in that bud in heat. Kind of like double peaches when you have a real hot July and August. Some of you peach growers have seen that. So I want to mention this quickly. Here's the varieties we've had. I'm not going to spend time on this, but I want to talk about Primark Horizon. Terry and Kirk, this is APF 268 is what this was. I think you had it, I'm not sure. This is a new variety. It's thorny, and it's a complement to Primark 45. And it has a huge floricane crop and primocane crop. It's big, nice looking berries in that reduced acidity range, although it varies in tartness because sometimes the floricanes will overcrop. And when you overcrop, you have tartar berries. It has a huge floricane crop potential. That's a primocane crop in Piedmont of North Carolina near Lincolnton. So that's a pretty good crop there showing up. And so it depends on the year how things go. Its harvest period is floricane harvest a little later than Primark 45. The primocane harvest is a little sooner. Overall, post-harvest is good on this. It's a really firm berry. It stays firm, one of the firmest ones we've had. And you can see they look pretty good right there. And then finally, the plants will really grow. So we need to be careful. Look at that upper picture. Those canes really have a more extended fruiting potential. It extends its fruit longer, and that produces more yield. We haven't done any tipping research with this, any other than what's done on all the other primocane fruiters. Hardiness seems to be about the same. I picked these on into October before, and that's interesting, but note I didn't say you were going to pick in October, and I'm well aware that a concern is spotted wing Drosophila late is a big concern too. If you want to look, I don't know where you get this, don't write that down, but there's a bunch of YouTube videos on the blackberries, including a primer on primocanes where I explain a little bit more about this. Last thing I want to mention, Dr. Margaret Worthington has taken my place. This is my last year now that we're into 2022 working at the university. So she is a fabulous colleague, a lot younger than me, smarter, more enthusiasm. And so our Arkansas program will continue. So I appreciate your time and interest.